sort through what the results of last night's statewide and local primaries, including a very close watched race for Attorney General, means for the future of Maryland and the D.C. region is Matt Bush. He's a reporter for WAMU 88.5. Matt, good to see you again. Did you get any sleep last night?
I got a little bit, yeah. I'm good.
Because I heard you on Morning Edition this morning, even though you left here late last night. Also in studio with us is Mark Plotkin. He's a political analyst and contributor to the BBC. Mark Plotkin, good to see you.
Good to be asked back. I'm not often asked back.
Well, this may be the last time. You too can join the conversation. Call us at 800-433-8850 if you have comments or questions about last night's elections, or you can send email to kojo@wamu.org. You can shoot us a tweet at Kojo Show. How do you explain Anthony Brown's landslide victory in the Democratic primary for governor yesterday in Maryland? The number again, 800-433-8850. Gentlemen, polls pretty much held up in the two races at the top of the ticket. Lieutenant Governor Anthony Brown appeared to be running in front of fellow Democrats Doug Gansler and Heather Mazier right from the jump. He appears to have won by about 25 percentage points. Mark Plotkin, I'll start with you. To what do you attribute his victory?
Well, I hate to quote anybody but myself, but there was a comment, maybe Matt can help me out, a professor who's always quoted in the Post, in the Gansler bio or profile, said that Doug is a victim of his own virtues. And I thought that was a terrific line. I wish I had thought of it myself. Doug Gansler has been running for president, not for governor, since he was 5 years old. His own mother says that. And I've gone to his fundraisers, obviously not contributed, since he was the Attorney General. This was supposed to be, the governorship was just a midway position to even higher political office. He's an extroverted, big-hearted, confident person who had some early stumbles,
missteps,
and including telling state troopers allegedly to hurry up and drive on the side of the road.
He says that's a lie. He said he thinks that was made up. The report was made up.
I did say allegedly. Yeah. Film of him at his son's beach party, and his overall persona. Either you like Gansler or you don't, and also the political establishment. I saw Mike Miller, the state Senate president, who said, look, he's going to get clobbered. He predicted this about a month ago. He said he's on everybody's ballot, that is the palm cards in my parlance, that they would pass out. And the role of outsider didn't, and Brown had a sterling resume with no visible sins.
And the endorsement of much of the political establishment in the
Almost
state.
all of the political establishment in the state got behind Anthony Brown. And Doug Gansler had the issues at the beginning, but his campaign never seemed to know what to do after that. They got hit with those right as they were starting. And then after that, I don't think they knew. They were constantly playing catch-up. They were constantly trying to push these things out of the way and get to other points, but at the same time, he spent an awful lot of time focusing on one issue, and that was the healthcare website and the rollout of the healthcare law in Maryland that the
and blaming Brown for it.
Right, that he oversaw, and he never really got to the other things he wanted to do, to sit and maybe talk to other Democrats and say, I'm not a part of the establishment. If you're upset with certain things that have happened in the last 8 years, I'm the person to vote for. He never got to that message.
He also ran as a conservative Democrat in a Democratic primary where progressives and liberals, and they're not ashamed of that moniker, came out. He was for cutting the corporate income tax rate. He said we can't spend all this money on pre-kindergarten. He also tried to initiate on the liberal side the same-sex marriage thing, but it just never resonated. And Brown was a very disciplined candidate. Gansler just didn't catch fire. I also thought Doug, who raised a lot of money, felt that he was going to outraise.
And he did at first. The first polls showed that, and then once Ken Ullman joined Anthony Brown's ticket, and Ullman had been looking at his own bid possibly, those monies sort of merged together, and then Brown was on even par.
I knew he was in trouble when I was hearing ads from Jolene Ivey, who lives as delegate from Prince George's, her husband Glenn Ivey, the state's attorney,
former state's attorney.
Former state's attorney, saying to African American voters, who are about a third of the primary electorate, that it reeked of desperation, is that because Gansler supported Obama in 2008, that black voters should vote for him, and the inference was that Brown was not sufficiently black.
Not sufficiently black. But it also appears that the accusations against Lieutenant Governor Brown over his role in the rollout of Obamacare in Maryland just didn't stick.
I don't think so. Again, you're in a Democratic primary. If this were a general election, it may have been different. But Democrats obviously support the law, and I think the person that's going to pay the ultimate price for the problems with the rollout, should they continue, as we've seen so much, this is sort of fallen off the wayside as an issue nationally as the law becomes more firmly entrenched. If anyone ends up paying the price for it, it's going to be Martin O'Malley, I believe, if he runs for a national office.
Martin O'Malley of Iowa?
Yes.
We're talking,
and that was, you could tell the confidence they had Brown was going to win if O'Malley was campaigning in Iowa last week.
This is true. We're talking about the Maryland primaries yesterday with political analyst Mark Plotkin and WAMU 88.5 reporter Matt Bush. If you have comments or questions on any aspect of this, what do you think accounted for the next topic we're going to get to? The low turnout in Maryland across the board in yesterday's primary, 800-433-8850. To what do you attribute the general lack of interest in this primary election across the state? Turnout appears to have been low in almost every jurisdiction.
It was lower than the predictions.
At Baltimore City Council said the turnout was heartbreaking, and another individual said in 58 years, or since 1958, I should say, he has not seen a lower turnout than this. Of course, the numbers are not out as yet.
Right, but it's looking around, in Montgomery County it was around 16%, and that was beneath the predictions that everybody was putting out of 20% statewide. So if that's what the highest, or the largest jurisdiction in the state was turning out, there you go. A lot of it had to do with changing it. We saw some issues in D.C. with moving the primary up, though D.C. did it in April. Maryland has a different issue where they couldn't have it in April because candidates who are in the General Assembly or elected to statewide office, which were all three Democrats who were in the race, couldn't fundraise or do any of those sorts of things during the legislative session until it ended in April. But then holding it in June, it's summer vacation. I just think that was a big thing. It was moving the time frame to the middle of the summer when a lot of people are on vacation and voting isn't necessarily at the forefront of their minds. And the campaign may have turned some people off too, particularly between the top two candidates on the Democratic side, because it was a pretty vicious.
It's been
campaign.
Called the ugliest Democratic primary in the country, Mark.
Yeah, bitter. We should mention that really the death knoll for Gansler was that he even lost Montgomery County.
Yes.
And which nobody thought would occur, that they gave that to him. Michael Martinez, your producer, told me he just won 3 rural counties.
Yeah, I'm looking at that.
And
and in the city of Baltimore, Heather Mazier outpolled him in the city of Baltimore too. And Gansler, at the end of his campaign, really started trying to focus on getting more Baltimore votes, and he finished third there.
And Brown won with some. Gansler got 15%, and Prince George's Brown was in the 70s.
76.
It was clearly disappointing for Gansler, but
I wanted to
Heather Mazier a lot of credit for running a strong.
Yeah, I mean, people wrote her off as somebody with no real rationale for even running. She had just been a delegate for a very short time. She lived in Berkeley East, Tacoma Park, Maryland. There were all that her appeal was going to be very limited. They were talking about her in single digits as just an irritant, and she almost beat Gansler.
She got over 20%, so she performed well better than the polls did. And I think maybe a lot of the part about her was people don't know her. She has a very dynamic personality. She has that ability to do that. So when she was out doing more, and she was doing more of the door-to-door sort of stuff because she didn't have the money, that really attracted quite a few people.
We should go to why the primary was in June, because of the fact that, and I think they're going to have to work this out better, or create the time to mail absentee ballots to military people so that they get back in time. But everybody has, for the lack of a better, more elegant word, freaked out about this, and they should realize that there is a certain time, and I think it is far too early. The April primary in D.C. is a more dramatic example.
Well, Ken,
July and August would have been worse.
Put on your headphones, because Ken in Gaithersburg, Maryland, has another hypothesis on why, in fact, the turnout was so low. Ken, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, hi, Kojo. Thanks for taking my call. And frankly, I think the reason the turnout was so low is because it had all the excitement of a local race for dog catcher. There was nothing exciting about any of the races.
What do you consider exciting, Ken?
Well, I mean, for example, for me, there was nothing that really grabbed me by my throat. There was nothing there was no candidate who was addressing any of the issues of, say, employment or traffic or really any of the major issues facing either Montgomery or Frederick County. It was basically a rollover election.
Well, Bush, I'm pretty sure the candidates themselves will say, sure, we addressed the issues, but maybe because we didn't address them in dramatic enough ways.
That's possible. And transportation was such a big issue, and it really didn't get a whole lot of play. In fact, remember in the first debate, a lot of that was the one out in College Park that David Gregory moderated. A lot of that was focusing on the controversies over the beach photo and the healthcare website. And at the beginning of the race, that became the narrative, and I don't think that really was going to excite anybody to go to the polls.
What challenger is up against Brown in the general election? That would be Larry Hogan. He's a businessman, former cabinet official from the Bob Ehrlich administration. Didn't seem to have too many problems beating the field on the Republican side, Mark, but that is almost certainly not likely to be the case come November.
Well, look, the Republican Party is in terrible shape. It would be a political miracle if Larry Hogan won. They're outnumbered 2-1. The last time was Bob Ehrlich, who beat a very flawed candidate, Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, before that. And Kojo is going to start rolling his eyes. Was Spiro Ted Agnew in 1966, who beat George, Your Home is Your Castle Mahoney, and he was the liberal, a Rockefeller Republican at that time. This is the fifth most Democratic state in the United States, the bluest of blue. Larry Hogan won because of name recognition. His father, I'm dating myself again, was Larry Hogan, who this is Larry Hogan Jr., Larry Hogan, who was actually a Republican congressman from Prince George's County when the racial composition was far different. The Republican Party doesn't have a chance, and I'll eat this microphone if Larry Hogan beats Anthony Brown, just because the party just doesn't have the numbers. And just tell me where the vote comes from. I asked Michael Martinez yesterday, I was getting gas listening to your excellent election eve. What did Michael Steele say that would attribute, besides the political pablum he usually serves up, about, I think the reason they won is that Ehrlich was a better candidate than Kathleen Kennedy Townsend. And then Sauerbrey came within 5,000 votes of Glendenning the first time. How did those two things happen? I ask you.
Those two things happened, according to Michael Steele, because in those days Maryland was a different state in terms of its red-blue division. But we've got to take a short break. When we come back, we will be joined by the Democratic nominee for Attorney General of Maryland, Brian Frosh. You can call us with your questions or comments for him at 800-433-8850 or send email to kojo@wamu.org. I'm Kojo Nandi. Welcome back to our Maryland election wrap-up. The primaries were yesterday, and if you have comments about them, give us a call at 800-433-8850. We're talking with political analyst and BBC contributor Mark Plotkin, WAMU 88.5 reporter Matt Bush, and joining us now in studio is Brian Frosh. He is the Democratic nominee for Attorney General of Maryland. He's currently a member of the Maryland Senate who represents a district in Montgomery County. Senator Frosh, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me,
and
Kojo.
Congratulations to you.
Thank you.
You trailed in polls throughout this primary. To most people, it seemed that your biggest obstacle was the fact that the leading candidate for most of the race, John Carden, has one of the better-known last names in all of Maryland politics. What was your strategy for closing that, in the eyes of many, name recognition gap, if you will?
You know, Kojo, I think what most people missed was the leader in all of those polls was undecided.
Yes.
Undecided was 50 to 70% in those polls. And so people weren't going to make up their minds until the last couple of weeks. And the Attorney General is usually a race that is down ballot. Well, it's always down ballot, but it's one that people usually don't focus on until the very end. And so we kind of backloaded our media, we backloaded our big effort, and that's when people started to focus, and we hit them just as they tuned in.
Kojo is always too civil, too polite, and I'd like to take a different tack. How did you push William Frick, who was going to run for Attorney General, out of the race?
Well, I didn't push him, but he decided right up at the deadline to run back for delegate, and that was very good for me. He's not only a Democrat from Montgomery County, he's in my district, and so that was a big help.
Let me ask you this follow-up. Your predecessor talked about his membership, Doug Gansler, in the Association of Aspiring Governors, the AAG. Once you're elected to Attorney General, should we assume, Brian Frosh, that you will soon afterwards be running for governor?
Absolutely not, Mark. No, Attorney General is the last office I'm going to run for. This is where I want to be. I think I can be a great Attorney General, and I don't aspire to anything else.
Matt Bush.
Now, I saw last night a tweet that when you were holding your victory party, and you were talking about what kind of Attorney General you were going to be, and someone said you quoted Elvis. So, what explain?
So I got a call from a reporter, and he said, who are you going to be like? What kind of Attorney General are you going to be? When Elvis Presley went to audition at Sun Records the first time, they said to him, so who do you sound like? And he said, I don't sound like nobody. And there are two role models for me in Maryland as Attorneys General, Joe Kern and Steve Sachs. They're my role models, but I'm not going to be like anybody else. I'm going to be Brian Frosh.
You said in your victory speech that you're going to fight like hell for justice. In more specific terms, what does that mean to you? What issues do you see yourself focusing on?
I mean, I think the things that people care about in Maryland, the things that my legislative career has been focused on, have been justice issues. And I use those terms somewhat broadly, but people want to feel safe in their neighborhoods, so criminal justice is a big issue. They want clean air to breathe, clean water to drink. They want environmental justice. They want to be free from scams and frauds and cheats, because that afflicts every Marylander, and especially the most vulnerable among us, our senior citizens. And people want equal opportunity, and to me that means a fair shot at the American dream and a quality education for all the kids. So
but you won't be in the business of making laws anymore.
That's
You'll
right.
be in the business of enforcing laws.
That's right.
What kind of mentality change does that involve for you?
Well, it is a big change, but I've been practicing law for more than 35 years, and many of the laws that the Attorney General is charged with enforcing are laws that I've written or helped lead through the General Assembly. So it does require me to put on a different hat, but I'm still looking at it in the same frame. I want to do what is right for people, what will improve their lives and protect them.
Let me ask about the body that you're leaving. You chaired a committee who will chair that committee next. And second, Mike Miller keeps on threatening the state Senate president. Well, I don't know how you can be alive and still have a building named after you. That in itself is quite an accomplishment.
Maybe the Senate president for 25 years.
Yes,
that's how
thank
you.
you.
Make that 28.
Oh, it's 28. Sorry, I got the.
He's a lawyer. He's very precise.
That's right.
Brian, tell me what you see that body, and is Miller going to stay? Who's going to succeed you? And do you see any change in the makeup or the flavor of that state legislative body?
Mark, this will be an historic year. There'll be a large turnover in the Senate. So I can predict one thing for certain. Mike Miller will continue to be the president of the Senate. He is extraordinarily adept, skillful, and he knows his members, and he'll continue to be the president of the Senate. As to who will be the next chairman of the Judicial
Do you have a
Proceedings
recommendation? We're trying to make a little news.
I have a lot of friends who are.
Name some of them.
Well, Jamie Raskin is a very close friend. Bobby Zirkin is a friend. They're both contending for it. I'm not sure who else aspires to that position, but the one thing I can tell you is that the decision will be made by one person. That's Mike Miller, and he's not going to be interested in recommendations from anybody else. He knows these folks. He knows the Senate. He'll make the choice himself.
Your committee work in the Senate has given you a prominent role in so many of the issues that are part of this ongoing conversation about the state's political identity, like legalizing same-sex marriage, repealing the death penalty. This follows up on the conversation that we had with Michael Steele yesterday. There's a sense among a lot of people that Maryland is moving farther and farther to the left. How do you see it?
I think the things that we've done are common sense, appropriate for the time. I mean, marriage equality, I think, was overdue when we passed it. I think it's been a great step forward. Repealing the death penalty was also a very important step. The death penalty doesn't work. It doesn't deter crimes, and we run the risk of executing innocent people. The Firearm Safety Act, which is another major bill that people put in that category, and one that I'm very proud of, is, again, common sense legislation.
Your predecessor, Doug Gansler, argued that he thought the death penalty was a good prosecutorial tool. How do you feel about that?
Well, as I say, I don't think it was a deterrent, and we have a poster child in Maryland for abolishing the death penalty. His name is Kurt Bloodsworth. He was convicted of a brutal rape and murder. He was sentenced to death. He served on death row, tried again, convicted again, and sentenced the second time to life without parole. He was innocent, and that was ultimately proved 9 years after he was sentenced to death.
Our guest is Brian Frosh. He is the Democratic nominee for Attorney General of Maryland. He's currently a member of the Maryland Senate who represents a district in Montgomery County. You can find live video streaming of the conversation we're having with him at our website, kojoshow.org, where if you're lucky, you'll see a photo. You'll also see live streaming of Matt Bush, WAMU 88.5 reporter. And if you're unlucky, you'll also see Mark Plotkin, the political analyst, who joins us in studio.
What a wonderful segue. There is a rap on Maryland that you are not business friendly. You're driving rich people to leave Maryland and move to Virginia. Doug Gansler, your predecessor, said that if you should get elected, offered a $600 million tax cut. He said you can't afford to pay for pre-K for 4-year-olds. Take on those two issues and respond to the what Kojo was talking about, the attack that you have. You've hurt Maryland's business-friendly climate. You're driving companies away to move, and you're not attracting new companies.
You know, Virginia is suffering much worse than Maryland is at the moment economically. They've been much slower to recover from the recession than Maryland has. So I'm not so sure that we have a business-unfriendly climate. The state is attracting new businesses, bringing in new jobs. It's a great place to live. It's a great place to work. We have knowledge centers around the state that our economy is dependent upon and built upon NIH, NIST, Johns Hopkins, University of Maryland. So right now we're doing better than Virginia is. In the long run, I know they're making huge cuts in Fairfax County. They're making huge cuts to their education system, letting teachers go. And I think in the long run we're going to outperform Virginia.
Before I forget, it seems like the governor is running for president already. He happened to be in Iowa. I'm sure it was a coincidence. He's always wanted to go to Iowa.
It's a nice time of year to be there.
Yeah. Does Attorney General Frosh, if he should be elected, is he the first out of the box in terms of elected officials who endorses Martin O'Malley for president?
And we had a question from Jack who couldn't stay on the line. Do you think Martin O'Malley can beat Hillary Clinton?
Well, that one I couldn't possibly predict, but let me tell you, I'm a huge Martin O'Malley fan. The three initiatives that we just talked about, marriage equality, repeal of the death penalty, Firearms Safety Act, I worked closely with him. Each one took guts, it took skill. He had both. He helped punch him over the goal line. I'm a big fan, and I think he'd make a fine president. I think he'd make a great president. I'm not, it's like getting struck by a meteor, but he's in the running. If Hillary Clinton does not run, I think he's in the top tier.
800-433-8850 is the number to call. Are there ideas for bills that you're pretty confident you'd be asking the General Assembly to pass if you're sworn into this job in January?
Sure. There was one that I sponsored. There was one that I sponsored this past session that I think would be a nice confluence of policy between the General Assembly and the Attorney General. I sponsored legislation along with Delegate Ben Kramer that would give the Attorney General the authority to prosecute abuse of vulnerable adults. And there's physical abuse, there's financial abuse, and often the local state's attorneys who are beleaguered by brutal rapes and murders and other crimes don't have the time to take these on, but there are patterns. And when somebody is stealing from vulnerable adult after senior citizen, it may be appropriate to give the Attorney General that authority. I think it is appropriate.
Who has the authority now?
Local state's attorneys. And this wouldn't take away their authority. This would layer on it the ability to give the Attorney General that discretion too.
Matt Bush.
In a more immediate issue, the turnout yesterday was very, very low. Now, the Attorney General obviously has a lot of influence on the elections and on when they're set. What will you do? Will you change the primary date if you're Attorney General? Would you move the primary date up? What can you do to have it in there? Because obviously the date that was picked yesterday here at the end of June really suppressed turnout.
It did. The Attorney General doesn't have the authority to change the date. It's up to the General Assembly. And the reason it was moved back is because there's a federal law that requires it to be 45 days before the general election. And that puts it before Labor Day in some years. And so the General Assembly struggled with that. We ultimately landed on, I guess, the fourth Tuesday in June. It's not ideal. I mean, it's terrible. It was after school ended this year. But I think it's unlikely that it's going to get moved, partly because the General Assembly doesn't want it too close to the end of the session because we are tied to our desks in Annapolis.
And you can't fundraise.
And you can't fundraise. And if you've got competitors who aren't incumbents, they're out there, they're fundraising, they're knocking on doors.
What prior to Memorial Day? Would that be too close? Like maybe the Tuesday before Memorial Day?
Well, I mean, anytime, as the further back you move it, the more it troubles the members of the General Assembly. So I just think as a matter of politics, it's unlikely that it's going to be moved very much.
I have two unrelated questions. What happens to Doug Gansler? Is he through? Is that his political obituary? Bright, young guy, twice state's attorney, twice attorney general, done.
I'm sure Doug Gansler is very interested in your plans for his future.
Yes, I couldn't predict what his political future is. He has a very bright future. He's a great lawyer. He's very talented. And
who did you vote for?
That I wouldn't say. The
secret
reason
ballot.
is, no, the attorney general is supposed to be independent. And I didn't run with any of the candidates for governor. I like them all.
Can I venture a DC question? The role of the attorney general, being independent, being elected, what powers it has. I know the constitutional questions and the determination between the split between federal jurisdiction and local jurisdiction. But if you should be elected, what powers should an attorney general have? And if they're outlined in the district as being so restrictive, does it really affect the performance of that individual?
Well, obviously, if you have more power as attorney general, you have additional capacity to affect change. And Maryland's attorney general is quite powerful. I mean, represents every single state agency and defends the state when it gets sued and brings suit on
But you're an
behalf of
independent entity because
That's
you were
exactly
elected.
right.
We might have in DC an elected attorney general that doesn't have that same degree of independence.
Well, I think the independence is important because the attorney general has to be able to say no to the chief executive. And you get into all kinds of trouble when you don't. If I can give a quick example
Sure.
of an area where that makes a huge difference. Steve Sachs was attorney general, elected in 1978, walked into office, and families of adults with developmental disabilities and mental illnesses were essentially being warehoused against their will in Maryland. And the state bureaucracy said, defend us. And General Sachs said, this isn't defensible. This is a violation of their constitutional rights. We're going to figure out a way to set them free. And that process has not been fully concluded. We still have much work to do for those folks. But we were holding them against their will in terrible conditions. And there's a great example of an attorney general who effected change by saying no to the chief executive.
Well, you are not General Frosh, at least not yet.
Not
you
yet.
still have an election to go through in November, but congratulations once again. Brian Frosh is the Democratic nominee for Attorney General of Maryland, currently a member of the Maryland Senate who represents a district in Montgomery County, and good luck to you.
Thank you very much.
We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we continue this conversation on the Maryland election wrap-up. If you have questions or comments about any aspect of it, give us a call at 800-433-8850 or send email to kojo@wamu.org. I'm Kojo and WAMU.